Welcome to episode 30 of Divine Superconductor Radio. I'm your host, Matt Blackburn, and today I'm interviewing John Moody. John is a farmer, homesteader. He started the Whole Life Buying Club in Louisville, Kentucky, one of the largest food co-ops in the nation. And he also was the executive director of the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund, which defends farmers and consumers against government action to restrict their ability to grow and consume real food. He also speaks at a lot of different events and fairs. I think you guys are going to love this episode because it's not too technical. We don't get too sciencey, and he makes it pretty easy to understand. He has a lot of great stories to enjoy. All right, I'm here with John Moody. Welcome to the show.
Great, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Right before we started recording, you were telling me about this really funny story that happened with Joel Salatin.
Yeah, so, about a decade ago, the federal government and the state governments began cracking down on people trying to access raw milk, people trying to get food directly from local farmers. So a group of us began to wage open guerrilla warfare with the FDA. And one of the things we decided to do is we decided to take raw milk from Pennsylvania over state lines right to Silver Springs, Maryland, which is where the FDA headquarters is. And right on the steps in front of the FDA, we were going to distribute and sell and drink raw milk and play Russian roulette with our lives, as the FDA likes to say. And so it was just, and what made it really great is my friend Max Kane, he started 4 or 5 months before the event, usually a couple times a month. He'd dial up the FDA and he'd be like, hey, he's like, is John Sheehan, head of the FDA, available? We want to just offer him an invitation to join us on such and such a day at such and such a time, because we're going to be bringing raw milk, man, and we know how much he loves it. So we get there, and there's about 200 of us from all over the country who showed up to drink raw milk and protest the FDA. The FDA actually went on the record in a court filing where they said that there is no such thing as a right to choose what you feed yourself and your family. So most people just aren't aware that the FDA's opinion is you have no fundamental right to choose what you eat. It's something, at the end of the day, they're the final arbiter. So we're at this protest, and Joel Salatin came. And one of the things is I'll just remember this story because there's news crews and there's all these famous food freedom type people, and Mark McAfee from the really big organic dairy in California and stuff. But there's a bunch of moms with little kids. And in the midst of just all this craziness, there's I think there's 30 or 40 Homeland Security and other vehicles that greeted us. No one from the FDA came out to interact or talk with us, but there's more than a dozen local police. There's this unending line of Homeland Security, as if a bunch of moms with small children are a roving band of Unabombers or something crazy. And so there's all these moms with little kids, and there's this one mom, you can tell her little child is just struggling and the mom is tired. And Joel just disengages from all the attention and goes over just to help this mom with her little kid. And that's what kind of I've seen him do this. That's what really makes him great, is he's obviously an amazing farmer, really gifted writer and speaker, but he just so deeply cares about people. And a lot of people just, because he's a celebrity, he's kind of a guru, but at the end of the day, he's the kind of person who takes a bite out of a peach or a plum, and his wife goes, "Why aren't you sharing?" And so he hands you the one he just took a bite out of.
That sounds more awesome than Woodstock, actually, that whole story.
Oh man, I have some stories. So
So that's that was an interesting way to jump in. I've never started a show like that where we just jumped right in. But can you just give an introduction about how you got into this? I think I was reading that you had ulcers uh, and allergies and all sorts of health problems, and that's kind of
yeah,
how you got into this real food movement, right?
yeah. So like I grew up pretty standard American. Grew up in Northeast Ohio, had four food groups: Fruity Pebbles, Cheerios with sugar I actually added to the already, nutritionless, high carbohydrate Cheerios. So cartoon watching, video game playing, um, processed food eating child of the 80s. Um, and so in 2000, I moved to Kentucky for master's work. And basically, about 2 years into master's work, my health just fell apart. Um, I'd always had some seasonal allergies. Really, I had seasonal allergies so bad growing up, Benadryl sent me free stock options as a thank you patronage. And I had cavities, and especially, as I got into college and stuff, my cavities got even worse. But then what really got my attention is, sometime late in my second year of master's work, I just developed unrelenting pain in my midsection. Just like, like a band of wandering gnomes who are jacked on cocaine and listening to Metallica are having an endless, digging rave party in your insides. Just 24/7 absolute misery. Um, and so I go to my doctor, and doctor's like, "Oh, this is no big deal." And I'm just like, like what the heck? He's like, "Oh, lots of people your age have problems like this." And that was like the first thing that just did not make any sense to me. Even though I had like no compass or no map, I was just like, it does not make sense to me that lots of early 20-year-olds are in like chronic, relentless, debilitating pain. Um, and he's like, well, we'll just put you on some medication. I go, okay. I go, well, what does this medication do? And he goes, kind of, he pulls out the insert. I don't, probably never looked at the insert. And it's like an old, like one of those, cartoons with Bugs Bunny where like they pull out the thing and the piece of paper starts to unroll, but it never stops. Like it just keeps unrolling. And it's like in .1 sans serif font. And he's like, oh, it looks like it shuts off your body's ability to produce hydrochloric acid. And my first thought is the Avengers need me. Like I produce hydrochloric acid, like that stuff burns through metal, burns through stone, like, and I make hydrochloric acid, like I'm an X-Men. Um, and then my second thought was, if my body makes hydrochloric acid, isn't that kind of important? And that's the thought I actually shared with the doctor, not the first thought. Um, and he had no response. He had never ever thought about the human body in terms of like design. Like it might be designed to function a certain way, and turning off certain systems might like have ramifications and repercussions for other systems. So your listeners have probably heard about people having to take poop pills. And a lot of people who are taking poop pills were people like me who were put on protease inhibitors and similar digestive altering drugs that were covering up dietary, lifestyle, other problems. Um, and now they have systemic C. diff and other infections because their body's hydrochloric defense system, which not only breaks down proteins, but also protects you from like a wide range of pathogens that your body does not want getting into your lower intestinal tract, is now shut off. And so my doctor just had no response to like this line of reasoning. Um, So when I left the office, I basically was primed and ready for a journey that, my wife and I are still on to this day. So because it is a journey with no stopping point.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah, I took some notes there, and it's funny because my older brother suffers from allergies, and there's so many things that disrupt the immune system. I come from the vegan vegetarian world, and I share mostly health information on this show, like physical
Uh-huh.
health stuff. And lately, my research, like all of this year, has been on the toxicity of unsaturated fats. When they switched
Yeah.
us over from animal fats to vegetable oils and seed
Yep.
oils. But not only that, omega-3 supplements, like people are all obsessed. Like they're not essential. They're not. I mean, Ray Peat has good information on that. But the hydrochloric acid piece, I mean, animal nutrition plays such a role in our health. And I think, if you're vitamin K2 deficient, you're not getting sufficient protein, then you can have all these symptoms, and then you go to the doctor and then you get scared, right? And then they put you on
Yeah.
some medication that's just masking the problem.
Yeah, well, and that's the worst part about the pharmaceutical approach to everything. Really better living through chemistry is, instead of seeking to actually understand how stuff works and understand where something went wrong, we got a pill for that. We got an herbicide for that. We got a pesticide for that. And it's just always like, it masquerades as being well informed. It currently in our culture is like the accepted, high priests are the scientists and like and the doctors who are pushing all these drugs and the foods. But when you actually look, they're really the least informed. They're like the emperor with no clothes. Like they don't actually understand soil cycles. They don't actually understand human digestion. So it's the worst part about it is they're so entrenched in their ignorance. Um,
Well
and
said. Yeah, they
yeah,
rely
it's
on the
just,
Merck manual, right?
oh yeah. So, um, yeah, and it just makes it so hard, like as a parent, because we have 5 kids. And I remember clearly when we took Abby, who's now our oldest, but she was our firstborn, and we had a better doctor when we used to live up in Louisville. Better meaning like not a hardcore pill pushing doctor. The kind of doctor actually who, when Abby was like 9 months old, she had like some kind of, she basically had some kind of infection. And we took her into the doctor because we were still, in the transitioning learning phase. So we were still at that phase where like, we need the rubber stamp just to know everything's okay. And we took her in, and he goes, I'm not going to prescribe her anything, but because she doesn't need anything. And then he said, but just realize, by me not writing her a prescription, I will get paid half as much for this visit as if I did. So
Wow.
he was a much better doctor. At the same time, he said to us, he goes, I guarantee that sometime in the first 2 years of her life, and he said this going, I know you're kind of crunchy people, I know you're kind of like going down this road. He goes, so just as your doctor, I just want to say to you, want to be upfront and clear. Sometime in her first 2 years of life, she's going to have antibiotics. And you're just going to have to come to terms with this. And now our kids have lived a combined total almost 40 years. And we have never once had to give our children antibiotics. Like, you can raise kids, and it's not to say we wouldn't use antibiotics, because antibiotics are like absolutely amazing. But I don't want to almost want to, they're not quite a nuclear bomb, but they're like a missile. Like when you use them, the amount of collateral damage you're going to inflict has to be worth, that collateral damage has to be worth it in the grand scheme. So and that was another thing that just like really stuck with me, where like we've had so many medical professionals tell us ridiculous things like that, even better ones. and then they wonder why you don't trust them.
Yeah, the antibiotic thing is really fascinating to me. I just interviewed my friend Danny Roddy. It was almost a 3-hour interview. Really cool guy, and he's been researching Dr. Ray Peat's work for
Uh-huh.
years. And he was saying there's a place for antibiotics. He's had benefit, and this is like a extreme health nut. I know spore-based probiotics can have a similar effect. They're like influencer strains that influence the
Yeah.
entire microbiome. But yeah, the gut health is something I'm fascinated with because it's so complex. I've been doing a ton of bone broth,
Uh-huh.
and I really feel the difference. Like I think 20 ounces about a day, maybe more, um,
Yeah.
for months, and I feel like it's really restoring my gut from my vegan days.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, and the thing that gets me is just like I'm reading Dr. Tom Cowan's book on cancer, and
Mm,
it's like cancer and the new biology of water. And one reason I really like Cowan is he's willing to speculate and admit ignorance at the same time. Just saying, and he even says in the book, he's like, I don't want you to accept what I just said as gospel. He goes, like what we don't know far outweighs what we do know. And so like we should all have kind of a good couple ounces of humility while we're waiting. And we should also just realize that what works for one person, because we're each individuals with different genetics and different microbiomes and different lifestyles and different locations, all of that ends up weighing in on why somebody feels great on this and another person just feels absolutely terrible. Um,
yeah, let's expand on that because that's one of my areas of fascination. I think in the health community, it's like you have all these different people saying this is the problem. No, this is the problem. It's glyphosate. No, it's heavy metals. It's
it's
whatever.
candida.
Right. Have you looked into Geoff Lawson and the whole NPK fertilizer piece? Because that I try to always find the common thread, in
Mm-hmm.
people's conditions. I'm a big fan of Morley Robbins. I just interviewed him for the third time for my
Yeah.
podcast, and he's the magnesium man, but he's
Uh-huh.
also studied iron and copper and how mineral dysregulation, throws off the entire body because the body runs on enzymes and those are
Yeah.
mineral dependent. And we're using nitrogen, phosphate, potassium, and calcium carbonate to alkalize the soil. And that's like even farmers markets are buying that synthetic toxic fertilizer, right? So
Yeah, I think with farmers, none of the farmers I know who sell at farmers markets are NPK only kind of people. At least where I am in Kentucky. And I should say at least for the good farmers markets. Um, Now obviously in some of the rural Kentucky farmers markets, I was just looking at a Facebook group earlier debating if I wanted to open a can of worms by commenting on a post because somebody posted how they had like some green beans or whatever they were struggling and they hit them with some like 30-15-8 NPK fertilizer. And I was looking at this person's soil, like, so everybody in the picture, because I'm a soil guy. So like, for your listeners who are trying to get to know me, um, like I took our farm soil from less than 0.5% organic matter to 20% organic matter for about the acre we use for intensive annual and perennial vegetable and fruit production. So like soil, because I always joke when we bought our farm, it came soil not included. And so I,
love
I
it.
I I had a vested interest in really figuring out how to build soil and stuff. And so this guy's on Facebook, and everybody's looking at the green beans, and I'm looking through the green beans at his soil, going, "Well, no wonder your green beans were so bad because your soil is dead." And yeah, you can cover up dead soil with synthetic nutrients, just like I could have covered up a broken digestive system with Nexium. But eventually, you pay the price for covering up rather than engaging with and dealing with, the problems and what's causing the problems in the first place.
Well said. Yeah. So there's so many, I've a million things I want to ask you, and I know we have a limited time, so I'm trying to
Oh, we're
prioritize
good.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with the NPK thing, I recently found like black gold. I'm just trying to like let's try to give people as much practical stuff they can apply in this episode. And I think like what soil do I buy is usually a question. I have a friend Charles Barber that he harvests like indigenous microbes and makes these mixes. But
Uh-huh.
for people that just want to start like a garden on their deck or whatever, do you think black gold is like one of the better? Like I have it at my local nursery, and it looks like it's. And of course, you add stuff to it, right? But as a starter, like you can't just go out and grab soil and then put it in a raised bed or in buckets, right? Was that because you'd have a ton
Yeah.
of other weeds with it and stuff?
Yeah. Well, th- I'd have to look and see how they're making it and what inputs they're using. One of like the only effective way to build soil large scale is through the interplay of annual and perennial biomass, basically pasture, coupled with the interaction of large animals, aka ruminants who eat pasture, and then all the other animals who follow and interplay with the ruminants. Um, and so normally when you're buying soil, it's a mixture of carbon, usually derived from trees, and manure from animals. And the vast majority of manure comes from CAFO animals, confinement factory raised animals. But this is even true for organic farmers. It's called the manure loophole, and it's the one like loophole that I don't like. But there really is no other answer. Um, the majority of compost used by organic farmers comes from conventionally raised animals.
Don't they use like bat poop too? I've seen like guano
Yeah.
in there.
Oh no, you can't. Yeah, because guano. It might be like a 45 for nitrogen. I mean, the stuff is hot. Um, so there's a ton of nitrogen in bat poop, which makes sense because bats, I think, basically only eat insects.
Yeah. What do you think about bat box? I know we're jumping around, but I have a ton of mosquitoes here, and I just installed 2 bat houses, like on my
Yeah,
about they could house like 300 bats per one. It's pretty cool.
yeah. No, if you can get bats to take up residence on your property, there's a fabulous story about a mayor in a town in Texas. I think it was back in the 1700s, maybe. Um, and so this was during one of the early malaria outbreaks in the southern part of the United States. And malaria is carried by mosquitoes. And this mayor was like trying to figure out what to do about it. And this like fits right in what we're talking about. Instead of trying to cover up the problem, he wanted to like solve it. So he began to study bats, and he began iterating on these bat house designs. And basically over the course of like 5 years, he developed these super large bat houses that bats just loved. And he eradicated malaria in this like whole region of Texas by working with instead of against nature. And it's just a super fascinating, awesome story. And I just always sit here and think about, man, like if more people operated this way, the places we would go and the things we would see. Yeah, so bat houses, absolutely. If you can get bats to take up residence in them, one of the top 10 things you can do on a property.
I love it. Super cool. Yeah. And there's so
And you can collect underneath the bat house. What you could do is you could build like a collection box, and fill it with a bunch of wood chips or something and let the bat poop go down into this box. And you'll need to drill some holes in the bottom so that it doesn't flood, get full of water. And then every few weeks, just take a pitchfork or something and stir the box to work the manure in. And you can make your own soil and your own fertilizer and get rid of your mosquitoes and a bunch of pests at the same time without disrupting your nighttime sleep schedule by hanging one of those bug zapping lights
Those are
outside.
loud.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you got noise pollution and light pollution all in one. So,
Yeah, that was great. And it's funny, all the stuff I'm doing here, I have 3 hens and a rooster, just very small, property. I don't know, 1/10 of an acre. It's very, very small. And I just have some potatoes I'm growing on the deck. I have a vermiculture bin. And I'm just starting to see, like, the more things I add, I start a maggot bucket. I'm just seeing the interconnection between all these different things. Like, oh, I can use this for this. And
yep.
it's kind of cool. Homesteading has that effect where you just start, I think that does something to the brain too. You're just making all these connections like, oh, I could use this material to help with this process. And it's just like a cool loop.
Oh yeah. If you homestead, you begin to realize, like, you go through the American educational system, which is almost fully isolationist and reductionistic. And homesteading is a complete 180 against that. So especially if you're going to succeed at all, because it's just like nature doesn't work that way. And so you either got to get with the program or nature's going to get you.
Yeah, well said. Have you experimented with vermiculture, like worm bins? And I'm sure you have.
Oh yeah, so I actually have a class on the Steader website that's how to make a homestead scale worm composting system.
Awesome.
Where
Wow.
I go over using IBC totes so that you can make, 100, 150, 200 gallons of worm compost that's really, really low maintenance and low input on your part. So we've been making, so like back before we moved to our farm, we lived up in Louisville and we lived in an apartment building. And so like, one of the things Joel Salatin says is if you want to be a farmer or homesteader, the first thing you should do is do where you are. So I bought earth boxes that I would move like all around our apartment complex lawn area, like to the chagrin of my landlord, who's just like, this guy is crazy. And then I had in the basement of our apartment complex, I had like a secret worm compost bin where like early in the morning I'd sneak down there to throw banana peels and eggshells and stuff and try not to let, the neighbors know that like I'm composting in the basement of the apartment building. So
That's awesome.
we've been doing worm compost. I got married in 2005, so probably like 13 years.
Wow.
So worms are my favorite farm and homestead animal. Nothing thrives on neglect like worms.
And what would you say are the major benefits of having that going? You can make your own soil and also compost tea, right?
Yeah, well, so with worms, you can make worm compost is a superior fertilizer to other types of compost. It's biologically superior. So it contains like hormones and other microbes that help protect plants from disease and that help encourage significant plant growth, which is why like I have a friend up in Wisconsin and he has a waiting list from the CBD growers and the hemp growers to get worm castings from him because these are people who really, really care about their growth rates and their fertility because they're getting buku bucks for their product. And they're willing to pay very large sums of money for his worm castings because they have seen trial after trial, batch after batch, the difference it makes.
That's
So
cool. Wow.
yeah, but worm castings are also a superior fertilizer because the nutrients are locked into a plant available but slow release form generally. So one of the big problems with synthetic fertilizers, kind of circle back, is when you apply them to the ground, um, plants can't, if I'm an iron molecule or I'm a calcium molecule, a plant can't reach down and grab me out of the soil. So most people, it's very similar to when you eat food. When food passes through your digestive system, your body can't actually grab the nutrients out of the food. It takes microbes. Basically the microbiome acts as the intermediary, kind of like the trading post. And that's what allows you to access the nutrients. So for plants, it's the soil biome. It's the hundreds of millions of organisms that live in the soil and that colonize plant roots that are required to let plants access these nutrients. Um, and so what happens with synthetic fertilizers is when they get applied, a lot of them, especially if we have heavy rain like we've had for the last 2 years, they end up washing into our sewer systems, washing into our waterways, washing into our groundwater supplies, ending up creating hypoxic zones at the mouth of every single river in the United States that empties into the ocean, because the nutrients aren't stable. So, and because the nutrients aren't easily recognized by the soil, they get washed away, which is one reason they have to use so much of them because you get such a low return on investment. So with something like worm castings, you get nutrients in a form that resists leaching, resists being washed away by heavy rains, but that's more available to the plants. So worm castings are just fabulous.
I love it. I want to talk about acid rain for a minute. You said a bunch of things there that made me think about it. So you just said like washed away from heavy rains, and I've studied acid rain for a little bit. Sulfuric and nitric acid,
Uh-huh.
burning fossil fuels, dry deposition, or from rain that falls down and ends up in our. That's why in our groundwater. That's why I'm not a fan of spring water. I always
Uh-huh.
recommend filtering it, even if just to lower the iron alone. I don't
Uh-huh.
think we should have iron in our water, but with the rain being 10 to 100 times more acidic, uh, that washes away the fulvic and the humic. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that the plants need fulvic, humic, ulmic microbes, fungi to attach a negatively charged carbon to a metal and make it carbon based so it can uptake it and make it an organic mineral. But that whole process at the root has been disrupted by pollution. Is that somewhat accurate? Have you looked into any of that? Or
It's definitely it's one part. Um, so I haven't studied rain pH and its effect on soil formation and degradation. Um, so in my experience, the main things that are really driving soil degradation are exposure to sunlight and exposure to oxygen. So like most people when they think about a garden, tend to think of like a bunch of plants standing in isolation in the midst of bare dirt. And this is like absolutely antithetical to what you want a garden to look like. Even though it is the accepted norm, for so much of what is gardening, and farming to people in America. Um,
I
so
grew up with computer games with gardening. I can't remember the name, but I played a gardening computer game So my dad was a tech guy, and I remember it was like monocropping. Like I have that
Yeah,
burned into my brain. It was like a raised bed with all pumpkins or whatever, and they all look the
yeah,
same.
yeah. So one of the big things, like I teach people when we do like on farm classes or I speak at different conferences, I show them pictures of how we grow, and they just like kind of have an existential moment of like despair because like it's a jungle. Like I'm growing clover underneath cucumbers next to basil with lettuces nestled in between and then green bean plants right underneath. And they're just like, ah. And but so much of what you're talking about, like with humic acid and fulvic acid and microbes, um, plant roots are basically um, the most important thing to have down in the soil. And if all you have is one pepper plant and then a foot of barren space and then another pepper plant, you have almost no root matter in the soil, which means the soil just dies. Everything falls apart without plant roots. And that's the worst part about our current approach to interacting with the soil and spreading plants apart and thinking that they can't live in harmony with other plants close by is it basically causes the soil to atrophy and die. Um, and so yeah, so cover cropping, intercropping, undersowing. I love teaching people a totally different way to think about food production that still just gets like incredible yields and results and isn't dependent on synthetic fertilizers and all this other stuff.
I love it. So, would you add anything to my, like, I have a little potato garden going on my deck. I guess it could be called a monocrop, but potatoes might be an exception, right? With how they grow. Because I just have them in those, those cloth, cotton or whatever
Uh-huh.
buckets. And do you think that's a good way to do it? Or would you mix things in those buckets with the potatoes?
Like other plants to grow or other
Mhm.
stuff in the soil.
Other plants to grow. Yeah.
I'd have to see how you're doing it because obviously, like, when you're growing in just a bucket or just a container, space is limited. So, but even in like, I still have the original earth boxes I bought, a decade ago that now sit in my high tunnel. But like in my earth boxes, I have like chives, I have thyme, some perennial herbs because we like to be able to move those around when winter comes so that we can almost grow those year round. So which is why I like them to be a little more portable than, a lot of what else we grow. But even in with my thyme and my chives and stuff, I have clovers growing underneath them, and around them and stuff. So so it obviously it depends on how big the container is, what you're growing in the container, because obviously like, when you go to harvest potatoes, any other plants, with growing something like potatoes, like in bags, which people do. My suggestion is after you grow the potatoes, that growing medium, I would feed through my worm bin to recharge it.
That's
Um,
cool.
so because I grow sweet potatoes sometimes in big totes, because people said you couldn't grow sweet potatoes in containers. So I grew like 40 pounds of sweet potatoes in like 3 cubic feet. It was nuts. If you go to, I'll try and remember to tag you in some pictures I have of it because it's just the craziest thing you'll ever see. Um, and so, but like that growing medium is completely, is pretty exhausted. And so, man, that growing medium though then is perfect to feed to your worms because they're going to recharge that medium. And that medium is going to have all kinds of empty space for excess nutrients. So
That's super cool. Would you add
yeah,
it to the top tray or?
Well, see, I don't do my worm compost in trays. I do it in a big 250-gallon tote. So I just pour spent medium in and just, basically like mix it, and then in 6 months it's completely recharged. Uh,
Oh, that's cool. I have to buy a property at some point to have that because I think if I ever move, that would be difficult.
yeah, we're hoping to move in the next few years, and the the one thing my wife and I always think is just like we have some stuff that's going to be really hard to move.
Yeah.
Yeah, how do you
Um,
move 3 tons of worm compost?
you brought up cannabis earlier, and I've friends in the industry. I was in the industry for about 3 years. I was never a big stoner pothead, and I have nothing against it. I think wake and bake probably isn't a good idea, but once at the end of the night, if you're balanced in your life and it's not affecting your relationships, I don't have a problem with it. And it's ridiculous to have a plant be illegal, I think,
Oh yeah.
um, but I wanted to ask you, a lot of people get like paranoia from like cannabis, and most farms, would you say, are spraying pretty harsh chemicals and growing it with pretty harsh fertilizers? I had friends, like I would see their grow ops indoors. It's like, whoa, they're just buying crazy nutrients, from hydroponic store or whatever. And that's probably affecting, just like anything else, I'm sure. I mean, wine's the same way, whatever, how it's grown, right? It's going to affect how it affects you, whether
Oh
it's the
yeah.
food or some
Yeah,
type of.
because it has such an effect on, and it has an effect on the plants in the areas that science tends to not care about. So nobody really studies or thinks about these things. So like the enzyme balance of the plants, the polyphenol balance of the plants, all of these areas where science is like, oh yeah, those things kind of matter. They're kind of cool. Um, but what really matters is just that a plant has sufficient nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. Um, y- you know, and yeah, it's just there's a talk I gave for a number of years at different conferences called "Dirt Poor, Badly Bred, and Improperly Prepared," and it was all about nutrient loss in food over the past 100 years. Where I just basically pulled data from all these different sources. Like you have to eat 8 oranges to get the same amount of vitamin A that your grandparents got from one. You have to eat twice as many green beans to get the same amount of calcium. You have to eat like twice as many pieces of bread to get the same amount of protein. So this is one reason animal feed has become so dependent on soy, because soy is really, really high in protein, and all the modern grains that we use to feed animals have seen precipitous declines in their protein content over the past 100 years. Um, so, then we're feeding animals huge amounts of soy that's full of, phytoestrogens, glyphosate, whatever else. And it's just, disasters in progress.
Yeah, well said. What do you think about corn? Because I use what is it? It's Miller's, I think. They're up in NorCal,
Uh-huh.
and I buy their feed. They have soy free, or they have corn and soy free. But that one was out, so I'm using soy free for the most part and giving
Uh-huh.
them corn. I've heard corn isn't as big of an issue as the soy, right?
I mean, like corn is a very old historical grain. I mean, so is soy to some extent if you read up on the history of soy. The big reason people go with soy-free feeds is because of the issue of cross-contamination with genetically modified crops. So you could take organically grown corn, and if you genetically test it, you're still going to get a small amount of genetic cross contamination, because pollen, pollen don't care. Like pollen and bugs go where they will.
Yeah.
And so, um, obviously, there's some people who are sensitive to corn, um, and for them, a corn-free fed animal might be worth the extra price. As a general rule of thumb, uh, uh, I think people worry far too much about some of the wrong things, and
I
they
agree.
put farmers in a no-win position. So a really good farmer I know, he was doing like soy free, corn free, going to a USDA inspected, not USDA, an organic approved inspected butcher house. And he went out of business because by the time he did all that, all the people who said they wanted those things could not afford them or just would not pay, for a product that was actually that price. Um,
Easy. Yeah, I just started beehives, and people are like, "Are you going to sell the honey?" I'm like, "Probably not. It's just for me, unless you want to give me, $100 for a little jar."
Oh yeah. So honey's finally starting to because it's became more popular, its price is finally starting to approach like the cost of production. Um,
Yeah.
so
Have you gotten deep in? I'm sure you have beekeeping, because I literally just transferred 2 nuke boxes into my 2 hives yesterday afternoon. It was a very sweaty, exhilarating experience.
we've let some people keep hives on our property, and up at our barn I have like 6 hives that need assembled. But it's just we just have like so many things going on. Because we have 5 kids, we have 35 acres. I oversee a buying club up in Louisville, Kentucky that works, feeds about 200 families a month from 30 different local farms and stuff. I wrote like 3 books over the past 2 years, um, and in the process of finishing up a fourth one. And so it's just like you got to pick. There's only just so many things you could do in the day. Um, and
Yeah.
the big thing is too, like a lot of homesteaders and farmers I know are very unhealthy, um, because they are trying to juggle so many projects and so many things on their farms. Um, and it's just like I do judo 2 to 3 days a week, with my kids. It's just like you have to find balance. And so I'm hoping once we move, we probably the kids will be old enough, probably get one of them into doing the bees or something because it'll be great for them. But like we have so many native pollinators on our farm because we've built such a, when we bought our land, um, there's still a few species of birds. You'd see toads, um, but like over the past 6 years, the ecosystem on our farm has exploded. It's just like native bees. I can't even count them in the mornings out on my comfrey plants.
Wow.
I just have this endless row of comfrey that every year I just keep expanding. Um, and like my daughter this year, and I helped her, we put in like 400 flowers, um, all throughout the garden and stuff. So I'd love to keep bees just because I'd love to have honey from my own bees. Because the people who kept hives on my farm said they never had honey from any location as good as the honey that came off the hives they kept on our property. So I'd love to have that, but it's just not something I could fit in at the moment.
I totally get it. Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons for having kids, right? Why people have kids to run the farm. And I'm starting to realize, like, shoot, I'm going to need a wife in a few years. I don't have time to be in the kitchen. I'm in the kitchen a lot making stuff, and but it's yeah, you said it. You have to pick your battles or what you do. Um, a big thing I want to talk about is uh, magnesium and copper deficiency in the soil. Like my friend Morley Robbins was saying that we're dealing with a lot of the people that he consults, and he's going by lab work. So this is like,
Uh-huh.
I mean, proven, but 3, 4, 5 generations back of copper deficiency. And I guess when a mother has that, and then she has you, and then she has a second kid, with each kid the mother has, uh, the kid's just robbing that last drop of copper from her. And so Morley was saying the good farmers that he knows sprays like copper sulfate on the soil. And that's probably inorganic, but if the soil's working, then I guess it can
Yeah.
uptake that copper, right?
Yeah. So like our soils are, it's not just copper and magnesium, it's selenium, it's iodine. There's just a host of nutrients, molybdenum. Like there's just there's tons of things most soils lack. And what's really interesting, just for your listeners, if you're making compost, say you're buying like certified organic vegetables and you're making compost from those scraps, that is no guarantee that you are getting these trace elements, because it's not like the industrial organic farmers are putting these down onto their soil. So just a good thing to realize, like, compost can only supply what was in the inputs to the compost. Um, so the inputs of your compost are of paramount importance, especially understanding those and then knowing what else you might need to add or do to balance out what, a lot of people will get their soil tested. And when I tell them you should also test your compost, they're like, whoa, I've never heard of anybody testing compost. I'm like, but if your soil needs this and you're putting your compost down, how do you know your compost has this unless you tested the compost? um, so it always
Interesting.
just like kind of rattles their cage.
You have me thinking like maybe I should put Shilajit in there. I just bought like kilos and kilos of the stuff. Have you looked into that? Like the resin that comes from different mountain. It's pretty much anywhere high elevation in the earth. I mean, it's even in the Rocky Mountains, but it's basically condensed like 15 million year old plant and animal matter in like a
Uh-huh.
resin that has. It's
Yeah.
basically the condensed ecosystem. And so I used to grow food with that and just pour it on the soil, and the plants loved it. I mean, all those trace minerals are in there.
Yeah. Like I when it comes to like this drives people nuts. I never give blanket recommendations for what somebody should do for growing food. The first thing I always tell them is you need to get soil tests done and you need to do a physical inspection of your soil. Like, is my soil a sandy loam? Is it a low organic matter clay? Is it a sand? Like, the physical characteristics, the soil organic matter levels, and then the chemical composition of the soil all begin to form a picture. And once you have the beginnings of that picture, then you can safely begin to paint on the canvas without creating a disaster.
Makes sense. It's kind of like the human body, like people taking multis and stuff.
Oh yeah, and it's just like, and you have no idea what if you need it. Yeah, it's very similar, like, because people are always like, "Would you take this supplement?" And I'm like, "Well, what did you eat today?" I'm like, "Well, what does that have to do with me taking a supplement?" I'm just like, it's that reductionistic thinking, because it's like, in the winter we like historical people groups. We'll take some vitamin D supplements. We try and take food-based ones. But in the summer, I don't take vitamin D because I live in Kentucky. I spend a number of hours outdoors every day. And I eat a lot of, saturated fat and cholesterol. And I'm fair skinned. Like, I should be synthesizing. And we eat a lot of our own pastured pork. Like, I got my vitamin D covered.
but you're going to get heart disease, right?
So
Just kidding.
yeah, well, I mean, if I do, at least I'm gonna be healthy when I get it. So,
It's so funny watching, like, I don't know if you know of the carnivore diet, like Sean Baker and Paul
uh-huh.
Saladino, but it's funny to watch the battling because the vegans literally comment, "I can't wait for you to have a heart attack." It's like, geez,
Yeah,
that's
even though
crazy.
vegans have one of the high, like as a population group, they have incredibly elevated rates of heart attack, stroke, and stuff compared, I think, even to the standard people. Um, you know, which you know it like the pot shots people in different tribes take at one another like that drive me nuts. Because again, it goes back to reductionism. Because like they've in studies shown that like the great grandchildren of people who lived through World War II genetically show markers from World War II from what their great grandparents went through. Like,
Wow.
if that doesn't convince you to have some humility when it comes to why somebody got cancer, why somebody had a heart attack, like obviously you and I would say your dietary choices make a very, very big difference in your health outcomes. At the same time, if you think you can magically, solely through dietary choices, undo all other factors that impact your health, I have some swampland in Antarctica to sell you. Um,
I love it. I
and
fully agree.
and it's just like, and it kills me when like, I think it's the one guy who speaks at some of the paleo keto conferences. He's a bit heavier, bigger guy, and people are like, or there's this meme some vegans or vegetarians were sharing of people who promoted more like a keto, low carb diet, and they chose the five worst looking proponents of the diet instead of choosing like the Rob Wolf, the Mark Sisson. And on the other hand, the keto people kind of do the same. They'll share ridiculous stuff like that, where they will choose the five worst looking vegans. And I'm just like, can we stop with like the middle school behavior?
Yeah,
So
I've been guilty of that. I mean, the Michael Greger memes are pretty funny.
some of them are
Almost
pretty
on
funny.
floor. But yeah, I think you never know what people are doing, right? Who's on steroids, trenbolone acetate. That's why I say you can't judge a person by how they look. I mean, I could inject myself with anabolic steroids and say, look, it's working, right? My program's working, but it's
Yeah, see,
like,
I just
you know,
inject myself with Photoshop.
just put a six pack on there.
Yeah.
Yeah. um, have you looked into the history? Like, it seemed like a lot of things changed. World War One, they switched us over from saturated fats, traditional fats, to seed oils and canola and rapeseed and all that. And then World War Two, that's when they started the iron fortification program of like our grains, and
Uh-huh.
um, and that compounded with the acid rain, liberating excess amounts of aluminum and iron into the soil. So, have you looked into like World War One, World War Two, and how those connected to our food system? Because it's pretty, like, the more I learn, like, uh, spent ammunition was kind of like infused in our food supply. It's my understanding.
Well,
It's pretty
basically,
wild.
not spent ammunition, but the leftovers of World War II
That's it. Yeah.
became the backbone of how we grew food. So there was on NPR a few weeks ago. I was driving home from town after having been up in Louisville for the day. And on one of the programs, they were discussing the German scientist, Bohr, I think is his name, HR, who discovered the Bohr process, which was how you make synthetic nitrogen to use as fertilizer. He was studying these things to make weapons to kill people. It was a fascinating show to listen to because the hosts were debating, because this man created some of the worst chemical weapons in all of human history.
Remember what it was called?
Oh, I don't offhand. I bet if you Google, like NPR, bore, chemical weapons, synthetic fertilizer, I usually can find NPR stuff pretty easily that way. So, send me a message on Facebook. I'll see if I can find it.
I'm definitely going to watch that because I'm obsessed with synthetic fertilizer. It's so interesting.
Yeah. But like the guy who came up with synthetic fertilizer basically did it by accident while he was trying to figure out more efficient ways to murder as many people as possible to expand the German Reich. It's just.
I thought it was Justus von Liebig, though, in the mid 1800s, or maybe Bohr took from his work and expanded on it. But.
Yeah, probably he, like, others I'm sure had noticed, like, this is how you can cleave this and do this. He was the one who came up with, like, reliable, large-scale processes. Because, the dude was an absolutely genius of a chemist in all the wrong ways. Because like a lot of the chemical weapons of the war were developed through his genius, like chlorine gas, mustard, just all of these absolutely horrific things. Since we have 5 kids and we homeschool, it's funny you bring up World War I and World War II because we're doing World War I right now.
Oh, wow.
There's a YouTube channel called The Great War, which is, it goes week by week through the entire First World War with a bunch of supplemental episodes. Really fabulous free resource. And the dude who did the channel, like my kids just love it. And then we discuss each episode and stuff. And then I'll bring in other information I know and things. So yeah, World War I and World War II, ushered in, not just geopolitical changes that we feel the effects of to today, but all sorts of technological and other changes that had all sorts of ramifications.
Well said. Yeah. It's interesting. Morley Robbins brought up how the Iron Cross, that versus the bronze medal in the U.S. The bronze medal is, made of copper. So we have this copper iron dynamic, and that dynamic was changed during World War II. So in our bodies. So it's interesting, like how this all trickles down. I just want to go into the 3 quick questions here I had some of my friends ask. Someone would like to know if it's viable from a financial standpoint to have a homestead with various production, or is it better to just focus on one activity, like goats for milk or something?
Well, it just depends on it depends on a lot of factors. It depends on your fencing. A lot of people don't understand that, like, fencing a homestead, if a homestead doesn't have fencing already, is a $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 expense to fence a homestead. Now, you could do some really cool things now, like companies like Premier, One Supplies. They sell portable electronet fencing. Really cool stuff. And so, but like, if you're starting a homestead, you always want to start with just, 2, 3 things and learn to do them well. Because, I give a talk at the Mother Earth News Fairs called Fantastic Mistakes Homesteaders Make and How to Avoid Them.
Oh, cool.
And one of them is, like somebody gets land and they buy a milk cow and 12 chickens and some hogs, and they put in a 5,000 square foot garden, and all of a sudden they're constantly stressed. Their garden is overran by weeds and pests and deer and raccoons who also happen to be having a chicken dinner to finish off their vegetable salad. And it's just like, the thing I say in my talk is you are never going to regret starting small and succeeding and then expanding, but you are always going to regret overdoing it and and having things go sideways.
Yeah.
On our farm, we have a structure that's called a high tunnel. It's like a greenhouse. So it's about 2,000 square feet. And I grow more food in that 2,000 square feet than most people grow in 15,000 field feet. Like, it's just, bigger isn't always better. Um, and should you get milk animals? A lot of that just depends on your situation. Because milk animals are highly restrictive. Cows need milked once to twice a day, every 12 hours. And this is the other reason, the big thing I tell people if they're going to homestead is move to an area with strong homesteading community, or like make that commute, because like, what do you do when grandma dies and you got to go to a funeral for 4 days on the other side of the country? Who's going to milk your goat?
Well said. My neighbors aren't cool with goats, and I really love raw goat's milk, and so it sucks. That's like the animal I want to raise the most.
Uh-huh.
But I've seen homesteading YouTube channels where their neighbors call whatever on them, and they have to move. And
Oh
this is
yeah.
hundreds of thousands of subscribers, and they're like, "Well, have to move everything to a more homestead friendly community." So
Oh
that's
yeah.
probably what I'm going to
It's
look into too.
Yeah, no, you really like it's if you're going to go into homesteading, um it's it's hard because the United States is a big place, and how do you find good places to homestead that like are also going to be where you can find work or meet all your other criteria? And it's not easy. It's one of the few things social media is helpful for. Something like a Facebook, there's tons of homesteading and other groups on Facebook that can help you narrow down that kind of search. So let's hit your next question.
I love it. Um, let's see. Ask about fertilizers. Good options to avoid NPK. Guess it'd be the worm bin, right?
Well, that's one. Again, like, um, y- you know, man, what's a good way to tackle this? So the first thing is you need to grow some of your own fertilizer. Even with animals, there's a number of good math articles that show that animals alone cannot provide sufficient nitrogen to sustain the food growing cycle. Now, obviously, these articles were written to say, and this is why we need synthetic NPK. But what's the crazy thing? What percentage of the atmosphere is nitrogen?
A lot, right?
A lot. I think
71%.
nitrogen, huh?
71%, something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Like nitrogen is the predominant thing we breathe. So you can grow your own fertilizer by planting legumes and other nitrogen fixers quite heavily in your growing spaces. So it's just like one of the big reasons you don't want to leave that empty space in your growing spaces is because you could be growing your own fertilizer. You could be planting bush beans, you could be planting clovers and other stuff. And the first time you plant them, you need to buy an inoculant. Some of the species of bacteria that colonize the roots of legumes that are what allow them to fix nitrogen in the soil. And then you're literally growing your own nitrogen fertilizer.
Whoa, what if EM1, like affected microorganisms, would that work or?
I don't know if it contains the particular strains. I've heard
Mm,
of that product. I don't
mhm.
know if it contains the strains that colonize legumes.
Interesting.
So, because basically what happens on legumes is as they put down roots, the bacteria actually form like nodules. And those nodules are where atmospheric nitrogen gets converted to soil nitrogen that plants
Wow,
can use. Really amazing stuff. Um,
that's really cool.
so obviously, like you want to compost. I would also heavily recommend you get Jerry Jenkins. Is that his name? His last name is Jenkins. His Humanure Handbook. Um, Human manure is one of the biggest. Um, if you think of, we want the food growing cycle to be a circle. You are one of the biggest breaks in the circle. Your poop and your pee represent an insane amount of fertility. Um, and if it freaks you out, what you can do is you can compost your poop and pee and apply that to your pastures or your forest or your grassland or whatever, and then let the animals graze that. And then, you capture some of their manure to, and you can obviously make it a multi-step cycle to break up pathogens and other things if you're not real good at composting. But, like, man, move to a composting toilet. Or you're
I
on
had
it.
one of those when I lived in my RV. It's funny.
Yeah. Um,
Smelly.
like one of the big reasons you have to buy fertility is because you're flushing it down the drain. I hate like I once said to somebody, if you realize that every time you peed and pooped, it was 25 cents on a number two and a dime on a number one, you'd start thinking about your poop and pee differently. But that's about how much the nutrients and organic matter are worth. So you're pooping and peeing like 5, 10, 15 bucks or more a month. Uh,
Wow.
so obviously make your own compost, make your own worm compost. Um, so, and then, once you realize you can grow your own nitrogen, then the big one becomes, well, how do I get more carbon, more organic matter in my soil? And, depending on where you are in the country, sign up to get wood chips dropped. Um, Local coffee shops, average small local coffee shop produces 5 gallons or roughly 60 pounds of coffee grounds per day. Coffee grounds are roughly 50% organic matter. So, like, you know, if you have to go to town once a week anyway and you got space, I used to drive. I have an old 1993 F350 diesel dually truck, looks straight out of Mad Max. Um, like I leave the keys in the truck, in the ignition, in the ghetto, up in town. Nobody even thinks about stealing that truck. It's 0 to 60 in 3 decades. I mean, it's like such a fabulous beater of a truck. And
That's so awesome.
few years we lived out here, when I went to town, I would take my truck because we had to go to town anyway, and I would bring home 2,000 pounds a week of coffee grounds and another 500 pounds of organic pitch produce that we feed to our hogs, we feed to our chickens, we feed to our worm bins. I figured out like a city like Louisville has something like 200 coffee shops. And that doesn't include the Dunkin' Donuts and everything else. That's that's at a minimum 50 times 200. That's 10,000 pounds a day of coffee grounds. That the majority of which are going into a landfill, getting mixed with synthetic paints, diapers, batteries. So you could be helping reclaim all those nutrients and getting free fertilizer. Um, so
That's awesome. Is there any benefit of dumping coffee grounds directly on the soil, or should you
You
always compost them?
yeah, you want to compost them first. So that's a bit of a debated subject. Just to make it simple, unless it's a growing area, you're not going to grow in for a year or so. Um, sometimes if I'm feeling lazy, I'll just go and dump. If we have a bunch of extra coffee grounds and I'm lazy, I'm just like push them off the truck over on this part of pasture, kids. Because it'll do fine. It's not going to matter. It's going to be good for the pasture. But for like an annual or perennial managed growing space, it's best to compost coffee grounds thoroughly first.
Awesome. Okay, awesome. And then last question, are ducks hard to raise? I just like the way they taste over chickens. You need
Um,
a pool, right?
yeah,
Pond.
well, no, there's some species of ducks you could raise with nothing but like a little plastic kiddie pool. Uh, or I've seen people, they'll take hay bales or straw bales and make what's sometimes funnily called like a redneck pool, where you take the straw bales and then you just lay some kind of liner that'll hold water, and
Wow,
and you make an impromptu pool. Um,
that's cool. Ah,
are ducks hard to raise? It just depends on your predator pressure, your location. All animals are simultaneously very easy and very hard to raise. Um,
yeah, I found with my chickens, a lot of the thing was just opening, closing the coop until I got one of those automatic doors, which
yep.
is just a lifesaver. Like that totally changed my life.
Oh yeah, and one thing I talk about in my mistakes homesteader make talk is like you should always be investing in automation because it's just like I see homesteaders carrying water to their animals. I'm like I'm like a hose is like $15 even if you got to buy two hoses to get up to where your animals are. A hydrant splitter and a couple hoses, and you're not carrying 5-gallon buckets of water anymore in the freezing cold weather, waiting to trip and like break your wrist. You know, a lot of times I just feel like people set themselves up for failure.
Yeah, well said. That's inspiring for me. I'm big into filtered water, so I'd have to figure out maybe put a shower filter on there. I'm on a well, but I'm still
Uh huh.
fanatical about water, so I could probably set that up. I have just those automatic of the it's like the tube PVC piping feeder
Yeah.
or water things for my chickens.
Yep.
Two of those, but I have to refill them every I don't know 3 or 4 days. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could also like set up your coop to catch rain and have it feed into their water. I always friends with a guy by the name of Thomas Massey, who happens to be a congressman at the national. Totally unique dude. You should have him on the show.
what's his name?
His
Thomas.
name's Thomas Massey, and so he's a Congress critter who's like the reincarnation of Thomas Jefferson in some ways. He lives in a completely off-grid house that him and his family built themselves. Um, and it's a timber framed house. So he cut down the logs and then hand cut the timber framing himself.
Whoa.
I mean, he's an amazing individual. But they were on vacation last week and he was texting me today. And he has chickens and they were gone for 8 days. He also, just to give full disclosure, is a mad genius. Him and his wife are both MIT graduates. And he built his own solar system and wrote the program that runs his house's solar system. Um, so he's just like an amazing individual. You'll meet very few people like him. But he sent me a text message, and he automated his chicken tractor. So like the water, the food, and the movement of the chicken tractor. So they were gone for 8 days. And the chicken tractor for 8 days dutifully moved the chickens like, every 2 hours the chicken tractor moves the chickens so many feet. And every
Whoa.
hours it, refit like amazing. Um,
That's so cool. And last burning question, I live in a pretty barren area. There's no like grasses coming. I'm in a 6,000 feet. It snows
yeah.
here. So I made a maggot bucket and I have a worm bin. Is there anything else you would recommend to keep the chickens fed? I started sprouting and I give them sprouts. I'll throw fruit scraps out there and they peck at it, but they always seem hungry. They actually ate my styrofoam box the other day. And I
Oh
was reading
man.
online that's like it's not harmful. It'll go right through them. But I was like, geez, they must be super hungry.
Well, partly it may not be hunger with chickens. It can also be a lack of entertainment. So like one thing I like to do for chickens, do you have your chickens deeply bedded?
What do you mean?
So like chickens, if your chickens aren't able to roam, say you have your chickens in like 100 square foot area, you should put down in that area 4 to 12 inches deep of wood chips, sawdust, leaves, all kinds of stuff. Now, number one, that will help produce food for the chickens because once you get carbon that deep, all kinds of bugs and other critters going to come and colonize it. And then the chickens will have something to scratch and turn and peck at. Um, so so it's just like it's just understanding like sometimes animals do unwanted things because they're bored like children. So like this time of year we get overran by the invasive Japanese beetles. And so what me and the kids do in the morning is we go to trap crops and we knock a bunch of the beetles into a jar of water. And then we walk over to our chicken's watering dish and we pour the water with the beetles in. And I mean, the chickens would put the worst headbangers to shame. How fast it's like you can dump 100 beetles into the water, and our 6 chickens will make all 100 beetles disappear in under 15 seconds. It's like machine gun
Wow.
fire. Just it's one
I
of
get
the
a
most
ton of I get a ton of raw milk, so I'll pour it in a bowl, and it flies go in there, and they just dive bomb
yeah,
it, and then it's like bobbing for apples, and
yep,
that seems to
exactly.
entertain them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I'd say like if you want to produce some more food for your chickens, um, that would be one thing I would do is I would give them now if they're totally free range, it's still good right around their coop. I want 6 to 12 inches of high carbon material for them to root in, play in, run around on. It helps keep them clean. Um, so and it just gives them something to do.
Awesome. I appreciate that. And what do you use, like hay bales to keep it in, or uh, like a raised bed kind of look, or kind of
You
whatever? I mean,
you could, I mean, like we get loads of wood chips from the local tree trimmers, and I mean we just have them dump them. The chickens just run all over them and spread them, and on occasion the kids will go out, usually a couple times a year. We turn the piles, and then the chickens are in heaven because like the insides of the piles are just colonized by so much stuff.
it's a super good tip. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, yeah. There's a guy by the name of Harvey Ussery who's a friend of mine, and he has a really great book called I think it's called The Small Scale Poultry Flock. And he talks about, basically creating um, you know, areas of biological decomposition for chickens to run over because they provide a lot of food for the chickens and a lot of diversion and, something positive for the chickens to do with their instincts and their energy.
that's super cool. I'm definitely going to look into that. I've even heard like cardboard, especially after like before it rains, putting out big cardboard things so bugs will go
Yeah,
underneath.
they go and hide under it, then you flip it. I used to do that with sheets of roofing metal. You lay it
Oh, cool.
ground and all kinds of stuff goes underneath, and then you flip it over, and the chickens, it's just like, it. Yeah, it's just amazing.
Well, thanks for coming on, John. I really appreciate your time, and stay with me. I'm going to close out the show.
Great.
What do you guys think of that one? We definitely just scratched the surface, of course. Homesteading is something that they actually have whole events around. And so that's actually one that he mentioned called the Rogue Food Conference. That's going to be in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I'll put the links below to all the different things that he mentioned. I really love the website steader.com because you could buy courses on vermiculture or soil health or just different aspects of having a homestead for, I think, $25 a course, so it's very affordable. I'll also put the link below to his book on elderberries. I think that's really cool, and I think foraging as well as hunting are skills that we've lost, and this is a part of having confidence if stuff hits the fan, or just to connect deeper with our local environment. I think it's really important to learn these skills more than, people get into prepping and it's about buying things and stockpiling things. But more important than all of that is having the actual skills and understanding that you're going to apply them differently in different situations. So I hope that this inspired you. If you don't have a chicken coop or bees, to just jump into it. And I think that's the best way to do it, is through trial and error. It's a lot easier than you think to get started. And a lot of cities now, even urban areas, enacted laws, I believe in Austin, where you can have legally 2 hens, and obviously no rooster because that's too loud. But even if you're in a city, just having 2 hens, just getting back some of that sovereignty with your food is really important. So today's quote is actually a meme that John Moody posted. What do we learn from cows, hippos, and elephants? It's impossible to reduce weight by eating green grass, salads, and walking.